this your backlog also. You
Yeah,
continue this Kubernetes installation also. Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
sure.
So what we are going to discuss? Tent, toleration, node selector, init sidecar pause, pod versus deployment, metric server, Kubernetes cluster from local PC, apply versus create versus run. When I use kubectl apply, kubectl create, kubectl run. EKS, EKS the last one more options. Okay, EKS Elastic Kubernetes Service console mode, that is graphically, and CLI command line through. And pod with load balancer. We already use pod with notepod. Now pod with load balancer. These 10 topics. And I'm going to support you all the documentations. Try to clear it. I just add one thing here, and toleration, and one more topic here I am going to add, node attach and detach. Suppose one master is there, you are going to add one more node or detach one node. So let's start. Theoretically clear the concept. So what is our target? First target, tent and toleration. Suppose we have one master and we have two worker. This is our master node, or it is known as control plane, and this is my worker 1, or it is known as node also, worker 2. Fine. What is tent? Tent, one feature, one character, one properties. Meaning of this is, if by default master is tented, by default master is tented. How to check? kubectl describe node, your node name, master, kmaster, whatever may be, k8 master, and then pipe grep tent. T should be capital. Otherwise it is not going to show anything. If you want to use tent in small letter, then you just use -i. That is not case sensitive. So it is going to show master is tented. In tent it will show no schedule, but worker node tent, nothing, no value. What is the meaning of tent? In master tent no schedule, that means when we are going to deploy any application, that is we are going to create any pod via kind pod or via kind deployment, pod is not going to create in master node, it is going to create in worker node only, because master node by default system is going to maintain tent no schedule, that is pod is not going to schedule here. So that is the feature of Kubernetes. You can tent any worker node also. So what is the target? How to tent one worker node? That is what is the command. And suppose right now I tent worker 1. So when I am going to execute any deployment, any pod, what happen? Pod is going to create in worker node 2, because master by default tent, worker 1, forcefully I am going to use tent, that is no schedule. So pod is going to schedule on worker 2. Now again my requirement is I am going to untent this worker node. So pod is going to create in worker node also. So question is how to taint and how to untaint. Even your master by default taint, you can untaint it. And after untaint, if I going to create one pod may be going to create in master or worker anywhere, because my 3 node is untaint. That means pod may be going to create in any node, master, worker 1 or worker 2. But default feature master is tainted, that is master is for no schedule. So we have to check how to taint, how to untaint. Okay. But this practice purpose, master worker is required, not on Minikube. Minikube only starting portion, installation, configuration and deployment. Deployment, pod, service and access it. That portion purpose it is okay. But taint tolerance purpose, master, worker, that is KubeADM cluster is required. Toleration later. First you clear the taint. Basically toleration, I just discuss what is the meaning. Suppose when I am going to create one pod, I didn't mention where it is going to create. Okay, I didn't mention where it is going to create. Suppose I am going to create one pod, single pod, via deployment as a kind, via pod as a kind. Okay, so when I am going to deploy it, it may be going to deploy in worker 1 or worker 2. No issue anywhere. That is depends on the decision of controller and scheduler. Now toleration one option inside of the pod, that YAML file or deployment YAML file, you can mention some toleration options. Okay, using some other conditions. Suppose somebody is going to irritate you. So your some level of toleration is there. After that you are going to fire. Same concept here. Node toleration capacity. If it is going to match, then it is going to create pod, otherwise it is going to move to another node. So that is one options, toleration. But this toleration latter, first the third option. Try to understand the third option, node selector. Suppose your worker node CPU 4, RAM 8 GB, but in worker 2 CPU 8, RAM 16 GB. I am going to create one pod. Pod requirement is 6 CPU. So I am going to select this pod should be create in node worker 2, particular node selector. Okay, or suppose in worker 2, due to this more CPU, more RAM, so many pods are scheduled already. So in worker 2, when I check what is the status of worker 2, CPU utility more or less 70%, 80%. Whereas worker 1 CPU utility is 40% right now. So I am going to select my next pod, it should be in worker 1. Depends on the situation. So how I am going to inform to pod or inform to deployment that this pod is going to schedule in worker 1, that is in particular node. I am selecting. If I am not going to select, it is totally depends on the Kubernetes. It may going to create in worker 1 or worker 2. But if I select it particular, I define it should be create in worker 1, then my pod is going to create in worker 1. Okay, that is node selector. Another option is there. Next class we will discuss it. First your taint node selector little bit clear. Once I show you practically, then we are going to discuss affinity and toleration. Okay, affinity and toleration. That is also same. That is where pod is going to create. But different options are there. Affinity, toleration, node selector, these are all, that is, in pod is going to create in which worker node. But node selector is straightforward. That is this node. Affinity and toleration, this is little bit dynamic. I am mentioning some concept, I am mentioning some logic. Depends on that logic, dynamically Kubernetes is going to choose the node where it is going to create. Okay, so static way node selector, dynamic way toleration and affinity. So this is taint and toleration. See, if I open this documentation, I just show you how you are going to go through this practice. See, this is the option. You can check your taint option, that is kubectl describe node, node name, grep, pipe, then grep taint. Now, if you check in your master node option, then it is going to show you no schedule. If you want to taint any worker node, kubectl taint node, node name, that is worker 1. Okay, this portion is not like this, it should be node name. I am using basically k worker, Kubernetes worker, k worker 1 app, this one, this command, no schedule. So if I use no schedule, means next time onwards when I am going to deploy any pod, it is not going to apply on this worker 1, it is going to apply on worker 2. Now again no schedule to schedule, that is taint to untaint. I taint this node, now I untaint this node. This command also available. When you check, it is going to show you the taint details. You just copy and paste it. Now no schedule, prefer no schedule and no execute, 3 options are there. In this place you can utilize 3 options. Okay, no schedule means pod will not be scheduled on the node. No execute means new pod will not be placed on the node and the existing will be moved out if those could not tolerate the current taint rule. That means if I taint my first worker, that is worker 1, already 2 pods are running, and I mention no execute, what happened? No more pod is going to schedule here and existing pod also switch to worker node 2. Normally this is the meaning. And another option is there, prefer no schedule. Prefer no schedule means Kubernetes will try not to place the pod on the node, but it is not guaranteed. That means first it will check, okay, this is prefer no schedule. So any other node is there? Suppose only 1 node or 2 node, worker 1 is tainted, no schedule. Okay. And worker 2 is prefer no schedule. Then what happened? No schedule means completely denied. Prefer no schedule. Now it is going to check any other node is there, no. Then it is going to create the pod in worker 2. Whereas it is prefer no schedule. Prefer no schedule means options. Try it. Not must, maybe. Now question is, this is how to taint using no schedule. How to untaint it, how to verify kubectl describe node, here it is node name. I am going to mention, suppose K master, my master node. Grep tents. So it is going to show it is no schedule. Now, if I want to untent, toleration right now not required, but untent you have to check. Remove the tent or untent. Same command. Just after no schedule one hyphen, that is minus, negate. No schedule minus. Here I am mentioning K worker 1. Suppose previously I tented it, now I am no tent. That is schedule to no schedule. Okay, sorry, no schedule first, and no schedule hyphen means again it is going to schedule. Okay, Control S. So this is your tent. Toleration right now it is not required. Node selector. Third option, node selector. See, when we write our deployment, within this deployment we can mention where it is going to create. So within this specification, containers, name of the containers, image of the containers, and we add node selector size large. Okay, we can mention, this is one label, node selector size large. Different options are there, using size, using resource. You can mention within your deployment how much memory, how much CPU is going to use. Request means I am requesting minimum this is, and limit means this is maximum. Okay, these are the different way to create your pod using kind deployment. So inside of this we can mention everything. Okay, I am sending one file, one document. What is the meaning of this API server? This is API gateway related version. Then kind, then what is this metadata, spec, then under here spec, node selector, I am mentioning size large. What is this? This is one leveling. In any node you can mention different level. Suppose in this worker 1 I mention one level. Level means same as a tag of EC2. Okay, when we utilize lambda, we mention where tag type equal to dev. Same here also we can mention the level of worker 1, level of worker 2. Suppose worker 2 CPU and RAM is more, I am using worker 2 level as a large and worker 1 level as a medium. Suppose we have one more worker, worker 0, CPU 2 and RAM 4 GB. That is, level is low. Same as your T2 micro, mini, medium, large in EC2. Here also we can set the label, and when we execute the deployment, target is to create the pod, we can mention this pod should be going to create on that particular node using the label. Now question is how to set the label. Okay, very simple command is there, how to set the label. So you can set the label and you can select that particular node, depends on label when you execute the deployment. Okay, so these are all basically where pod is going to create. Directly taint untaint, that is enable disable these options. Directly node selector, it is going to create in this node only, not any other node. And other than this, so node selector basically depends on the level of the node. Other than this, pod is going to create in which node, in which worker node, that is depends on toleration and affinity. So we will discuss toleration and affinity also. So this is one phase. Next option, number 2, node attach and node detach. Suppose this worker one node condition is not so good, we want to detach it from cluster. Okay, if you didn't properly detach, then in master node it is going to show worker 1 it is not available, worker 2 is running. Worker 1 is attached to cluster, so worker 1 information is available inside of the cluster. Who is going to hold the information of this cluster? Any answer? In your Kubernetes master, who is going to hold the information of this cluster node and others, all information? That is by etcd. etcd is the key value database, that is NoSQL database. So etcd is going to hold all the information of your node. So if I want to detach this worker 1 from the cluster, then properly I have to remove it. Okay, properly. Otherwise, cluster is going to disturb. Okay. So node detach, how to detach it? Attach already we completed when I show you worker node attached to master node. That is, master node means basically the cluster. But detach till now we didn't complete it. So you please go through the steps. Just check it how to detach, and then after detach also how to attach it. Okay, so you have to know how to detach any node from Kubernetes existing cluster. So some steps are there. Suppose in human beings also, you have some problem, doctor is going to operate. Doctor is going to detach one portion of your body. Suppose some stone is there in any organ. So proper way, okay, general anesthesia, then doctor is going to remove that, then you are back to your normal stage. Same case, normally we are not going to just shut down the machine and detach from here. Physically you can detach it, but logically still worker 1 as a member node of your existing cluster. So we have to inform to cluster, I am detaching this. How to inform? Different commands are there. First we are going to logically detach it, then physically detach it. Okay, first we inform to cluster, this node is I am going to detach. So this node first you detach from etcd, then some few options are there. If any pod is already running, then that pod is going to move to another machine, another worker node. Okay, in production you have to take care of existing pod, existing service. If anything is there, we have to move to another worker node and then detach it in proper way. So taint, node attach detach, node selector, this is over. Practically we will check Saturday. Before that, please go through this and clear your concept. And if you go through the command also, it will be little bit clear to you. Now practically we will check it using this minimum 3 node, master 2 worker. Now next option is init sidecar pause. Whenever we create any pod using pod or deployment, we are going to mention some init container, sidecar container, init container and sidecar container. We have to mention it in our YAML file. Okay, this is started I think 1.22 onwards, most probably, this init sidecar concept. So what is init? See, basically inside of pod, your application containers are there. Okay, inside of your pod, application container is there. And we already discussed, inside of pod, multi-container also possible, single container also possible. But industry choice is single container. Why? Because each and every container has their own IP address. And whenever it is going to wrapped by pod, encapsulated by pod, pod is going to hijack the IP address from container. So container IP address is going to used by the pod right now. So single pod, single IP, single container. If multi-container is there, then pod is going to confused which IP I am going to use. Now, other than that application container, we are going to start one init container and one sidecar container. Init container. Name init means this is initialization. That is, whenever our application container is going to create, before that init container is going to create. An init container, that is some metadata. Okay, some metadata is going to declare. Once init container is started, then only your application container is going to start. And you cannot delete init container. If you delete init container, your application container is going to delete. So first init container is going to start, then application container is going to start. And when application container is going to start, side by side, sidecar container is going to start. So sidecar and application parallelly. Init first it is going to start. Sidecar container, some other options are there. It is going to maintain the log and others of the container. Okay. So first you go through what is init container, side container, pause container. Pause container, we are not going to create pause container. Pause container is going to create by the Kubernetes automatically. Okay. Then we will discuss what is the purpose of this. First you go through this. Init, sidecar, pause, other than your application container. Because interview time they are going to ask number of questions from here. What is init container and why it is? Okay, from which version it is started? What is sidecar container? What is the difference between init and sidecar? That is actual purpose of init and actual purpose of sidecar. Then what is pause container? So we have to clear this three different types of container other than your application container. Pod versus deployment. If I create one kind pod and mention everything, and if I create one deployment and mention everything, when I run it, pod is going to create one pod, deployment is going to create the deployment, and that deployment going to create one pod. Then what is the difference between pod and deployment? Okay, this is our target. What is the difference between, actual difference between pod and deployment? Normally pod testing purpose we are going to create, but production purpose it should be deployment. Because pod, to the point pod. Deployment, inside of so many things you can declare. Okay, replica, port, number of things. Now suppose in worker node 2-3 pods are running. You want to check a particular pod related resource informations. That is my pod, suppose pod 1, pod 2, pod 3 are running in worker node 1. Now pod 1 is going to use how much resource? That is how much CPU is going to use, how much RAM is going to use. So for that purpose, first we have to install metric server. Okay, first we have to install one more software that is known as metric server. Then only you can use kubectl pod name, or kubectl top pod name. Top command is there. That command is going to show you your this pod is going to use this much resource. So we have to install and configure this metric server. Then only we can check the metric. Now suppose this master and worker, these are running in AWS or any VMware based your local network, that is on premises. But on premises it is in Bangalore, and you are going to connect from Hyderabad or Bangalore from your office premises. So from office premises you are going to use one local PC. From this local PC, what is our target? From this local PC we are going to connect our cluster. Okay, normally when I create this master and worker, I connect it to master, and from there I am going to deploy. But normally in industry we are going to use one third machines, that is local PC. When you are going to connect any remote machines, we are using SSH. Same as this local PC, from this local PC we have to connect our this cluster. We are going to connect this cluster, and from local PC you can run deployment, taint, all the commands, everything, total administration of Kubernetes cluster from this local PC. Okay, now question is how to configure this local PC. What should I do so that from this local PC it is going to access the cluster? Okay, we have to configure it. See, when I think yesterday we discussed COPS. So COPS purpose we are creating one EC2, and then with the help of that EC2 we are going to create COPS cluster, that is COPS through Kubernetes cluster. So Kubernetes cluster means master, worker, one master, two worker. So this EC2 PC is your local PC. Even you can create COPS from local PC. Then local one Linux PC, Linux machine, you have to configure AWS CLI, and from this PC you can execute the COPS related, because everything is going to execute on AP South 1 in your account only, because you already mentioned in local PC. So that is also this Kubernetes cluster from local PC. Now when I use EC2 for COPS, automatically it is going to create as a local PC for Kubernetes cluster. It is specially for COPS. But if we are using our on-premises Kubernetes master and Kubernetes worker, okay, Kubernetes master and Kubernetes worker, and two administrators are there, they are going to connect from their laptop. So we have to configure this laptop as a local PC to access our existing cluster. So we have to check what happened. Basically one kubeconfig file is there. Okay, first we have to use SSH connectivity, then kubeconfig file. Kubeconfig file we have to copy from master to this local PC. So you will check it. In next class, completely practical based, and one by one everything we are going to discuss. But before that, please clear your concept, go through that command, and if you create this type of that is one master two worker cluster, then you can check it. Success, unsuccess, not an issue, but if it is possible, check it. Otherwise, minimum go through the documentations. Okay, next option is when we create any class, any pod or deployment through, we are using kubectl apply, but kubectl create also possible. kubectl run also possible. Now question is, what is the difference between this kubectl apply, kubectl create and kubectl run? Okay, what is the differences? You already use apply, but you have no idea when I use apply what happened. Yes, it is going to create the pod, create the deployment, that is true. Then create also going to create the same thing, run also going to create the same thing. Then what is the difference? So we have to check it internally, what is the difference between this. Last option is pod with LB. If I am going to create one pod, 2 pod, that is not an issue, that is how many replica, using deployment or pod. Now I want to access this pod, this application which is running. We already access it through notepod service. Now our target is load balancer. Through load balancer I want to access it. So if it is in AWS, that is we are accessing this network in AWS, this cluster in AWS, then little bit different configuration. And if it is in our VMware, that is on-premises data center related, then this load balancer configuration is little bit different. Okay, because if it is locally, then it is known as metal LB, and if it is in AWS provide the load balancer. So in AWS it is little bit easy, straightforward, but if it is in locally, then we have to use another options, metal LB. So we are going to check not through notepod, same pod, same application, testing purpose Nginx or our Python. Now access through load balancer. So when I use load balancer IP address, it is going to access your application. Okay, so we have to check how to access, how to expose your application, because I already discussed different type of services. Headless, only from node, cluster IP, inside of the cluster, node port, outside of the cluster, but using the port number. Load balancer, outside of the cluster, without port number, only URL or IP address. Then we are going to replace again, far better than load balancer, that is ingress. And nowadays ingress also going to replace by the gateway API. Okay, day by day it is going to improve. So later we will discuss ingress and gateway API also. Now last topic, that is EKS, Elastic Kubernetes Service. What is this? If I am going to use Elastic Kubernetes Service, then AWS is going to create the master node. Okay, AWS is going to create the master node, and this master node is going to manage by AWS. That is, we have no headache about master node. Okay, we are just going to maintain our worker node. So EKS through, first when we create the cluster, either through console, that is graphically, or through CLI, command line, it is going to create only the master node, EKS cluster master node. Okay, once master node is created, then we are going to create the worker node. Okay, or working group, some terminology is there as a group. How many nodes my requirement in group? So we are going to create that working group, working node group, and we are going to attach to master node. So EKS, Elastic Kubernetes Service, completely managed by AWS, but it is managed only the master node. When we create EKS through console or CLI, it is going to create only master node and fully managed by AWS. See, EC2, RDS, S3, these are all managed service. AWS managed service. AWS is going to manage it. Complete take care by AWS. EKS also same. EKS master is going to manage by Kubernetes. Once it is okay, next option, we have to add working group, that is working node group. 2 node, 3 node, 4 node. In future also we can add one more node to this working server or working node or working group. Okay. So EKS different. EKS next Sunday practically I am going to show you EKS console mode and then CLI mode. Console mode first up, CLI mode second up. Okay. But other than this, if you create this network in your locally, or if you create this network in AWS, then you just create one local PC. In this local PC, you install CLI, configure CLI using the secret key, secret access key, okay, access key and secret access key. And you already mentioned AP South one, that is Mumbai. And then few other steps. From here you can access your this cluster which is in Mumbai. So EKS is secondary options. First your option is 1 to 8. Then pod with LB, that is another service we are going to introduce, and then EKS. So first phase is 1 to 8. Just go through all the documentations. If there are any doubts, welcome to institute, or you just update me. We will continue one class at morning time, okay, or evening time, which is possible. Okay. If you have any doubts, I will update the class time within this week at any time, depends on your requirement. At the same time, when you update me that this some doubts is there, update me the timing also, evening or morning. So other people also they can join and they can enjoy it. So you please go through these options up to 8, then 10 and then 9. Okay, next Sunday, next Saturday we will discuss up to this, plus we will try pod with LB in AWS or locally, no issue, Metal LB option is there. And Sunday EKS practically. Okay, still now you didn't complete it installations, even Minikube also didn't complete it. If I am going to continue, then you will face big issues, big problem. You cannot understand. So please from your side complete first Minikube, deploy any pod that is Nginx related, deploy one service that is Notepod, access it. Once it is okay, delete it. Now try to create master and 2 worker. Okay, master machine minimum 4 GB RAM, 2 CPU, worker node 2 CPU, 3 GB RAM also possible. So 3 plus 3, 6 plus 4, 10, 10 plus your local machine 2, 3 GB, that is 12 GB or 16 GB. And processor also should be good, because Windows already used processor, then 3 node is going to use processor, inside of that node pod is going to use processor. So processor also requirement. Otherwise you can create T2 medium machine. Okay, T2 or T3 medium machine in AWS if you are interested. Fine, kubectl, that is kube ADM through cluster. Minikube just starting purpose, understanding purpose, create it, that's all. So I am sending, depends on this, all the documentations numbering wise. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, this number wise. So easy to find it. That is metric server, that is 6th number 1 document is there. Okay, so please continue it and join Saturday. But in between, if you have any doubts, update me, join the class, online, offline, your choice. Okay, I'm sending this documentation, depends on this number. Let me change it and I'm going to send you. Any questions?